The loudest soldier on the parade ground was usually the one with the least to remember. The rain began exactly at 0600 hours, falling in perfectly measured sheets across the enormous training yard of the Aurelian War Academy. Artificial storm towers suspended above the floating fortress released millions of icy droplets that struck polished black stone with a steady rhythm like thousands of tiny drumbeats. Blue warning lights reflected across the soaked surface, while rows of towering alien cadets stood at rigid attention, their silver training armor gleaming beneath the overcast sky. The air smelled of ozone, wet metal, and freshly charged energy shields. Every breath carried the sharp taste of electricity before disappearing into the cold morning wind. At the very end of the formation stood the only human on the field. Caleb Walker wore no ceremonial cape, no polished medals, and no impressive insignia. His dark gray training jacket had faded from years of use, the stitching repaired by careful hands instead of expensive equipment. His black boots carried faint scratches that no amount of cleaning could erase. Water dripped slowly from the brim of his collar, yet he never reached up to wipe it away. His posture remained relaxed but perfectly balanced, like someone who had spent an entire lifetime standing in uncomfortable places without complaint. Several cadets glanced toward him before exchanging amused smiles. One of them, a tall blue-skinned trainee with bright silver eyes named Lysera, tilted her head just enough for her friends to notice. "That is the famous human advisor," she whispered with barely concealed amusement. Another cadet quietly laughed. "He looks like a maintenance technician who wandered onto the wrong parade ground." A third folded her arms. "I expected someone taller." Their laughter remained soft, but in the disciplined silence of the academy, it carried farther than they realized. Caleb heard every word. He simply looked toward the distant mountains floating beyond the academy walls, as though the conversation belonged to someone else. One cadet finally stepped closer, curiosity overcoming restraint. "Human," she called with a playful smile. "Do your people always arrive without armor?" Caleb slowly lowered his eyes toward her. His calm gray gaze revealed neither irritation nor embarrassment. "Sometimes," he answered quietly. "Depends what we expect to survive." The cadets looked at one another before another round of laughter spread through the formation. They interpreted his answer as an awkward attempt at humor. Caleb offered no explanation. He simply adjusted the worn leather strap securing one glove around his wrist, making certain it rested comfortably before letting his hands fall naturally back to his sides. The movement was small, habitual, almost invisible. A distant transport engine echoed across the academy. Every conversation stopped instantly. A sleek command shuttle descended through the rain, its silver hull reflecting the storm clouds overhead before settling onto the elevated landing platform. Hydraulic locks hissed softly as the entrance ramp lowered. Commander Valara Thorne stepped onto the rain-soaked platform without carrying an umbrella or protective shield. Her long blue ceremonial coat moved gently behind her, while silver command markings shimmered beneath the academy lights. Her expression remained calm, unreadable, and absolutely composed. Every cadet immediately snapped to attention. Even the rain seemed quieter as she crossed the parade ground with measured steps. Valara inspected each formation without speaking. Her luminous silver eyes moved across every cadet until they finally reached the silent human standing at the end of the line. She stopped. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. Caleb gave a respectful nod, nothing more. The commander studied the faded jacket, the repaired gloves, the weathered boots, and finally the calm expression that had not changed despite the laughter surrounding him only seconds earlier. Then, without acknowledging the whispers or introducing the human, she turned toward the assembled cadets. "Today," she announced, her clear voice carrying effortlessly across the rain-covered academy, "you will participate in an evaluation unlike any your instructors have ever given you." No one noticed that as she spoke those words, her eyes returned to Caleb for the briefest fraction of a second, carrying the unmistakable look of someone who already knew exactly how this morning would end. Commander Valara allowed the silence to linger for several seconds after her announcement. Rain continued striking polished stone with mechanical precision, while the formation remained perfectly still beneath the gray morning sky. Then she raised one hand. Instantly, dozens of holographic projectors emerged from beneath the parade ground. bathing the academy in pale blue light. A three-dimensional map of the training complex appeared above the soaked courtyard, its corridors glowing like veins beneath transparent crystal. The words "Red Corridor Evaluation" slowly rotated in the center before dissolving into hundreds of shifting pathways. Every cadet recognized the simulation. None had ever been allowed to enter it. Murmurs spread quietly through the ranks before discipline returned. Veilira spoke without raising her voice. This exercise evaluates observation before reaction. Strength is irrelevant. Speed is secondary. Victory belongs to the individual who notices what everyone else ignores. Lysera exchanged another confident glance with the cadets beside her. She had ranked first in tactical movement for 3 consecutive semesters. Amaze would simply become another trophy. Her silver eyes briefly drifted toward Caleb, standing alone near the end of the formation. The faded jacket, worn gloves, and quiet expression made him seem even more out of place surrounded by polished academy armor. She smiled to herself. "Perhaps the human can keep score," she whispered. Several cadets struggled to hide amused expressions. Caleb heard the remark, but continued watching the floating hologram instead. His eyes traced every corridor, every access hatch, every maintenance shaft hidden beneath the projected floor plan. He noticed tiny details no one else seemed interested in. Emergency exits were not evenly spaced. Air circulation arrows flowed against the expected direction in 2 sections. One corridor lacked a structural support column found throughout the rest of the design. His gaze narrowed slightly. Something about the layout felt familiar. Not the architecture, the pattern. It reminded him of military evacuation drills he had once practiced aboard orbital carriers years before. Commander Veilira noticed the subtle change in his expression. She said nothing. Instead, she activated another layer of the simulation. Portions of the map disappeared, while several corridors shifted positions. The cadets frowned. The academy records say this maze changes every session, one trainee quietly observed. "Good," another replied. "Makes the challenge interesting." Caleb remained silent. Dynamic corridors did not concern him. Predictable systems that pretended to be unpredictable usually followed mathematical habits. He quietly counted the interval between each structural shift. 11 seconds. Then 11 again. Then 12. Not random. Close enough to appear random. His fingers absent-mindedly tightened the old leather strap around his glove before relaxing again. Across the courtyard, Veilira addressed the formation. Teams of 6. No external communication. No artificial intelligence support. You will solve the course using judgment alone. Lysera stepped confidently toward the front of her squad. "Understood, Commander." She glanced toward Caleb once more. "What about our guest?" Veilira answered without hesitation. "He participates." A brief wave of surprise moved through the assembled cadets. One trainee quietly muttered, "He is not even wearing academy equipment." Another shrugged, "He will not last 5 minutes." Caleb simply accepted a standard academy wrist communicator offered by an instructor. The device looked almost new compared with the weathered watch already resting on his other wrist. He clipped it into place without examining it. Veilira watched the movement carefully. It was efficient, unhurried, familiar, like someone who had repeated similar preparations thousands of times under circumstances far less forgiving than a training exercise. A distant warning tone echoed across the academy as massive steel doors slowly opened at the far end of the parade ground. Beyond them stretched a dimly lit entrance lined with cold white lights disappearing into darkness. Artificial wind drifted from inside, carrying the scent of wet steel and recycled air. The red corridor was waiting. Most cadets saw a competition. Caleb quietly studied the airflow crossing the entrance and realized something no one else had noticed. The corridor was already changing before anyone had taken the first step. The massive steel doors closed behind the last participant with a deep metallic echo that lingered through the endless corridors like distant thunder. Instantly, the sound of rain disappeared, replaced by the steady hum of ventilation systems hidden behind smooth alloy walls. White guidance lights illuminated the floor in narrow strips, while faint streams of cool air drifted through the passageways carrying the sterile scent of polished metal and fresh circuitry. Above every intersection, holographic timers counted silently toward 8 minutes. The evaluation had begun. Without hesitation, Lysera accelerated into the first corridor with the confidence expected from the Academy's highest-ranked tactical cadet. Her squad followed closely behind, boots striking the floor in perfect rhythm as they trusted the navigation arrows projected across the walls. Several teams disappeared into neighboring passages almost immediately, each believing speed would secure victory before the maze completed another structural shift. Caleb remained standing just inside the entrance. He did not move. He closed his eyes for a single breath, listening instead of looking. The distant ventilation fans rotated at slightly different frequencies. Somewhere beyond the nearest wall, heavy locking mechanisms engaged several seconds before the overhead lights adjusted their brightness. Then he opened his eyes again. The arrows on the wall still pointed left. The airflow did not. A young cadet glanced back toward him with obvious disbelief. "Human, are you frozen?" Another called while jogging past. "The clock is running." Caleb simply smiled politely. "I noticed." They disappeared around the corner, laughing quietly among themselves. He remained where he was for another 3 seconds before taking his first step, not toward the illuminated guidance path, but toward a narrow maintenance corridor almost hidden behind an emergency equipment panel. There were no arrows leading there, no markings encouraging anyone to enter. Only a faint current of cooler air escaping beneath a partially concealed service hatch. Caleb crouched beside the panel and lightly rested 2 fingers against the metal surface. It vibrated every 11 seconds, matching the structural rhythm he had counted outside on the parade ground. "There you are," he whispered. Meanwhile, Commander Veolara observed every movement from the Academy's elevated control gallery. Around her, instructors monitored hundreds of live camera feeds floating in translucent holographic windows. Most displays showed cadets advancing rapidly through brightly lit corridors exactly as expected. One smaller screen displayed Caleb standing quietly beside the maintenance hatch instead of following the course. An instructor folded his arms. "He has already wasted nearly 40 seconds. Another nodded. "He appears uncertain." Veolara never looked away from Caleb's screen. "No," she answered calmly. "He is confirming a hypothesis." The instructors exchanged puzzled glances but remained silent. Deep inside the maze, Lysera reached the first major intersection and confidently selected the route recommended by the holographic navigation system. Seconds later, the corridor walls shifted with a soft mechanical rumble. The path behind her vanished. The map displayed on her wrist communicator flickered before recalculating into an entirely different layout. Her confident smile faded. "That is unusual." At nearly the same moment, Caleb quietly opened the maintenance hatch. Behind it stretched a narrow service passage lined with exposed coolant pipes, electrical conduits, and inspection lights glowing soft amber instead of Academy white. He looked once toward the official corridor before stepping inside the hidden passage. Unlike the polished training route, the service tunnel showed years of careful maintenance. Every conduit carried tiny identification labels. Every airflow sensor pointed toward the true direction of circulation. Caleb smiled almost imperceptibly. "Every maze still needs people who know how to repair it," he murmured. Above him, unseen by every cadet inside the evaluation, one discreet observation camera silently rotated to follow the quiet human alone, as though the Academy itself had suddenly become far more interested in where he intended to go than where the official course expected him to be. The narrow service passage stretched quietly beneath the Academy like the hidden spine of a living machine. Amber maintenance lights glowed at regular intervals across exposed conduits, while coolant pipes released a faint whisper every few seconds. The air felt cooler here, carrying the clean scent of lubricants and filtered steel instead of the artificial atmosphere circulating through the official training corridors. Caleb walked without hurry, his boots producing almost no sound against the textured maintenance flooring. He occasionally glanced upward toward small inspection windows built into the ceiling. Beyond them, he could see flashes of movement as cadets rushed through the maze overhead, chasing holographic guidance markers that constantly rearranged themselves. None of them realized the building itself was quietly revealing the answers beneath their feet. Caleb stopped beside an open service console where tiny indicator lights blinked in repeating patterns. He rested 2 fingers lightly against the metal housing. 11 seconds. Pause. 11 seconds again. Then 12. Exactly as before. He smiled faintly. The maze was not random. It was synchronized to the maintenance cycle of the academy itself. Every wall movement, every locked passage, every changing route depended on a mechanical rhythm hidden below the exercise. "You cannot fool your own engineers," he murmured. Far above him, Lysera reached another major intersection. Her wrist display recalculated again, replacing the previous route with 3 new possibilities. She frowned. "The map keeps changing." One cadet looked over her shoulder. "Then we move faster." They accelerated into the nearest corridor. Seconds later, another section sealed quietly behind them, while a different passage opened somewhere else. Confusion slowly replaced confidence. Their breathing became quicker. Small mistakes multiplied. One squad entered a circular hallway that returned them to the same intersection twice, without anyone immediately noticing. Another team argued over conflicting navigation updates, while precious seconds disappeared from the countdown. Inside the observation gallery, instructors exchanged increasingly puzzled expressions as performance statistics fell below academy expectations. One officer tapped the central display. "Reaction times remain excellent, yet decision accuracy continues dropping." Another nodded. They trust the navigation more than their surroundings. Commander Velara stood with her hands folded behind her back, her attention never leaving the small window following Caleb through the maintenance network. An instructor finally asked the question everyone had been thinking. "Commander, why is the human ignoring every official objective?" Velara answered quietly. "Because he identified the real objective before entering the maze." The room fell silent. Below them, Caleb arrived at a reinforced maintenance door secured with an old mechanical locking wheel instead of modern electronic controls. He examined the polished handle before noticing dozens of tiny scratches surrounding its edge. Maintenance crews had opened this door thousands of times over the years. He slowly rotated the wheel until the seal released with a gentle hiss. Beyond it stretched a compact service platform overlooking nearly half the training complex through transparent observation panels. From this hidden position, he could see corridors shifting throughout the maze like pieces of an enormous puzzle. The entire system suddenly made perfect sense. Instead of memorizing routes, the Academy's maintenance crews simply watched the structural cycle and adjusted everything from here. Caleb quietly studied the synchronized movement for several seconds before raising his wrist communicator for the first time since entering the exercise. He did not call for assistance. He simply recorded the timing sequence. 11, 11, 12. Repeat. His expression remained calm, but his gray eyes sharpened with quiet certainty. "The walls are not leading the cadets," he whispered. "They are following the ventilation schedule." At that exact moment, every holographic timer across the academy flashed amber as the exercise entered its final phase, and somewhere deep inside the maze, the structural rhythm unexpectedly changed for the first time since the evaluation had begun. The change came so quietly that none of the cadets noticed it at first. The steady mechanical rhythm Caleb had followed since entering the maintenance network disappeared, replaced by an uneven sequence that no longer matched the movement of the walls. 11 seconds became 9. 9 became 14. The ventilation fans deep inside the academy shifted to a lower frequency, and the soft current of cool air flowing through the service corridor suddenly reversed direction. Caleb stopped walking immediately. He slowly looked upward through the transparent observation panel. "Someone just switched the system to manual control," he said under his breath. In the main training corridors above, Lysera and her squad reached what appeared to be the final approach toward the extraction platform. Bright guidance lights illuminated a straight passage nearly 100 feet long, ending beneath a glowing academy crest suspended above a reinforced exit door. Relief spread across several faces. "We finally found it," one cadet said with a smile. Lysera nodded and took her first step forward. At that exact moment, every light inside the corridor turned deep amber. The floor beneath them vibrated softly before 2 transparent partitions descended from the ceiling, separating the squad into smaller groups without warning. No one was trapped. No one was injured. Yet suddenly, every cadet stood alone, unable to reach the others except through distant glass walls. Their communicators filled with harmless static as directional arrows disappeared from every surface. Confusion replaced confidence almost instantly. One cadet hurried toward another passage only to find herself gently redirected by moving walls into an unfamiliar section of the maze. Another attempted to follow her map, but the display simply read, "Environmental recalibration in progress." Inside the observation gallery, several instructors leaned toward their consoles in surprise. "That sequence is not part of today's programmed evaluation," one officer said. Another quickly searched the Academy database. "There are no scheduled changes." Commander Veolira's calm expression never changed. "Open the maintenance control logs." A technician immediately obeyed. Hundreds of automated entries scrolled across the holographic display until the newest command appeared. Manual environmental override. Authorization level, Commander Training Division. The technician frowned. "Commander, no instructor issued this command." Veolira quietly studied the authorization code before speaking. "I know." Deep below the maze, Caleb continued following the reversed airflow instead of the maintenance map. The cooler air no longer traveled toward the central ventilation hub. It now flowed away from it. He reached another observation platform overlooking the structural control chamber hidden beneath the Academy. Rows of silent motors rotated enormous magnetic locking assemblies responsible for shifting every corridor above. Normally, the machinery operated automatically. Today, one console displayed a single flashing indicator. Manual override active. Caleb stepped closer and examined the operating screen. Someone had changed the evaluation after it began. Not to make it harder, but to force every participant to rely entirely on the navigation system that had just stopped working. He slowly smiled. "Observation before reaction," he whispered, remembering Commander Veolira's opening words. This was never a maze test. He turned toward the nearest emergency communication terminal and pressed the activation panel. The system connected immediately to the observation gallery. For the first time since entering the Academy, Caleb spoke directly to Commander Veolira. His voice remained calm, steady, and completely free of urgency. "Commander, your cadets are following instructions instead of reality. Tell them to stop chasing the exits." Silence filled the gallery for one brief heartbeat. Then Veolira looked toward the instructors surrounding her before answering without hesitation. "All teams, listen carefully. Disregard every navigation display. Observe the environment. Trust your senses." Across the Academy, dozens of confused cadets froze where they stood. Among them, Lysera slowly looked away from her blinking wrist communicator for the very first time and noticed something astonishing. A gentle stream of cool air was flowing through a narrow maintenance vent hidden beside the wall, pointing toward a passage no holographic map had ever shown. The effect was almost immediate. Across the shifting corridors, cadets who had spent years trusting tactical displays slowly lowered their wrists and began paying attention to the Academy itself. They heard the steady whisper of moving air. They noticed the subtle vibration beneath the floor every few seconds. Some even realized that the white guidance lights were not leading them toward the exit at all. They were simply marking the latest structural change. Lysera stood motionless beside the hidden maintenance vent, allowing the cool current to brush against her hand. Instead of rushing forward, she closed her eyes for one quiet breath. The air flowed consistently in one direction despite the moving walls surrounding her. For the first time since entering the Academy, she ignored the holographic map completely. "The building is showing us the answer," she whispered. She stepped into the narrow passage beside the ventilation shaft. Moments later, another cadet spotted the same pattern inside a different corridor. One by one, the scattered teams stopped chasing glowing arrows and began observing sound, temperature, airflow, and rhythm. Inside the observation gallery, performance statistics immediately changed. Stress indicators fell. Decision accuracy climbed. An instructor stared at the data in disbelief. "They are adapting." Another slowly smiled. "No, they are finally paying attention." Commander Veolira remained silent, watching the displays with quiet satisfaction. Her silver eyes shifted toward the maintenance camera showing Caleb still standing beside the communication terminal. He had not attempted to reach the exit. He simply observed the cadets correcting themselves without taking credit for the change. One instructor finally asked the question everyone had avoided. "Commander, who exactly is he?" Veolira looked through the transparent observation window toward the maze below before answering. "Someone who learned long ago that surviving has very little to do with moving first." Deep inside the maintenance network, Caleb quietly disconnected the communication terminal and resumed walking through the service corridor. Every structural shift around him sounded familiar now. Hydraulic locks released. Cooling fans adjusted speed. Magnetic rails repositioned the movable walls above. To him, the academy no longer resembled a maze. It resembled a living machine quietly performing its daily work. He paused beside another inspection window overlooking the final approach corridor. Through the transparent panel, he watched Lysera guide her separated squad members toward the extraction platform, using nothing more than airflow and observation. She no longer hurried. She no longer argued with the navigation system. She simply watched the environment before taking each step. Caleb smiled faintly. "Now you are learning," he murmured. Seconds later, the final countdown reached 0. The academy lights shifted from white to deep blue as every movable wall slowly returned to its original position. Heavy steel doors unlocked throughout the complex with synchronized precision, while a calm synthetic voice echoed through every corridor. Evaluation complete. Proceed to the central assembly platform. Cadets emerged from dozens of passages wearing expressions very different from the confidence with which they had entered. Some looked thoughtful. Others appeared humbled. Lysera stepped onto the assembly platform and immediately searched the crowd until she found Caleb quietly arriving through an ordinary maintenance door instead of the official exit. For several seconds, she simply watched him. The worn jacket, the repaired gloves, and the calm gray eyes had not changed. Yet somehow everything about him seemed different now. She slowly walked toward him before stopping a respectful distance away. "Human," she said softly, no trace of mockery remaining in her voice. "How did you know the maps were wrong?" Caleb looked toward the enormous academy around them before answering with the same quiet simplicity that had defined every word he had spoken that morning. "Because maps are drawn by people." He glanced upward as cool air drifted gently across the parade ground. Reality never asks for permission to change. Before Lysera could reply, a sharp ceremonial tone echoed across the academy. Every instructor immediately straightened. Commander Velara stepped onto the central platform with measured, deliberate strides, her expression calm, yet carrying a quiet gravity that made the entire parade ground fall completely silent. Commander Velara stopped at the exact center of the assembly platform while the last echoes of the ceremonial tone faded into silence. Hundreds of cadets stood at attention beneath the clearing sky, their damp uniforms reflecting the pale morning light that now broke through the clouds above the floating academy. The artificial rain had ended. Small drops continued falling from towering crystal arches, striking the polished parade ground with quiet rhythm. The air smelled fresh, carrying traces of wet stone, ozone, and cooling machinery after the demanding evaluation. Velara slowly surveyed every face before speaking. "Today's exercise has concluded." Her calm voice carried effortlessly across the enormous courtyard without the need for amplification. "Your scores have already been recorded." A large holographic display rose behind her, listing completion times, navigation efficiency, observation ratings, and tactical adaptability. Several cadets searched immediately for their names. Lysera found herself near the top of the rankings, but instead of feeling proud, she quietly lowered her eyes. For the first time in her academy career, the numbers felt incomplete. Velara allowed the display to remain visible for only a few seconds before dismissing it with a simple gesture. "These results," she continued, "measure performance." She paused. "They do not measure understanding." The academy fell completely silent. Even the instructors remained perfectly still. Velara turned slightly toward Caleb, who stood exactly where he had been since leaving the maintenance corridor. His posture remained relaxed, hands resting naturally at his sides, his worn jacket still carrying faint traces of moisture from the morning rain. He neither stepped forward nor attempted to avoid attention. He simply waited. "Cadets," Velara said, "how many of you believe the navigation system was correct?" Nearly every hand rose. A quiet murmur passed through the formation as they realized the implication. "How many of you questioned the building itself?" No hands moved. Lysera looked down at the polished stone beneath her boots. The answer embarrassed her more than any failed exercise ever could. Velara nodded once. "Exactly." She walked slowly across the platform until she stood beside Caleb. This morning many of you believed observation meant looking harder. Her silver eyes swept across the formation. It does not. Observation begins the moment you stop assuming you already understand what you are seeing. One instructor stepped forward respectfully. "Commander, permission to ask a question." She inclined her head. "Granted." The instructor turned toward Caleb. "Why did you enter the maintenance network instead of following the official course?" Caleb answered with the same quiet simplicity that had defined every action throughout the day. "Because someone has to repair the maze after everyone else finishes getting lost." A few cadets smiled despite themselves. Even several instructors exchanged restrained expressions of amusement. Caleb continued before the moment passed. "Engineers learn something soldiers sometimes forget. Every system leaves clues about how it actually works. If you only study the instructions, you miss the machine." Lysera slowly stepped forward from the formation. She stopped several feet away and offered a respectful academy bow, one reserved for experienced professionals rather than fellow students. "I judged you before I understood you," she said honestly. "I believe confidence came from appearing strong." Caleb looked at her with calm gray eyes. "Most people do." She hesitated. "Does that ever bother you?" He smiled faintly. "Only when it stops them from learning." The answer lingered in the quiet morning air long after he finished speaking. Around the parade ground, many cadets unconsciously glanced toward their polished armor, advanced communicators, and glowing academy insignia before looking back at the weathered human whose equipment appeared decades older than everything surrounding him. Somehow none of it seemed outdated anymore. In the observation gallery above, the senior instructors watched the parade ground without speaking. One of them quietly closed the academy evaluation report before saying almost to himself, "They entered believing experience was measured by rank." Another slowly nodded while watching Caleb stand among them without the slightest desire for recognition. "Today," he replied softly, "they discovered experience often arrives wearing the oldest boots in the room." Commander Velara remained beside Caleb for several quiet moments after the assembly settled into silence. The wind drifting across the academy carried away the last traces of rain, replacing them with the crisp scent of mountain air and polished steel warming beneath the returning sunlight. Above the parade ground, the academy banners slowly unfurled as automated maintenance drones resumed their routine patrols, almost as though the morning's lesson had become another ordinary day in the life of the fortress. Yet every cadet standing there knew something had changed. Vealira turned toward the senior instructors positioned along the edge of the platform. "Open Archive 7. The request caused several instructors to exchange surprised glances. Archive 7 had not been accessed during ordinary academy instruction in decades. A technician placed one hand upon the control console, and moments later a massive holographic display rose behind the commander. Instead of tactical diagrams or engineering schematics, an old recording slowly appeared. The image quality showed its age. Colors were faded. Audio carried faint static beneath every word. A younger version of Commander Velara stood aboard a damaged command vessel surrounded by exhausted officers. Emergency lights flashed across the bridge while warning indicators covered every display. A calm human voice echoed through the recording. "Everyone stop chasing the problem. Watch what the ship is already trying to tell you." Caleb quietly lowered his eyes the instant he heard the recording begin. Several cadets looked toward him in surprise before turning back to the projection. The younger Vealira appeared on screen studying structural diagrams almost identical to those used inside the academy maze. The recording continued only briefly before fading into a final still image showing the damaged vessel safely reaching orbit. The archive closed. Absolute silence followed. One cadet finally whispered, "That was him." Vealira nodded. 21 years ago. She looked toward the assembled formation. "During the Orion Gate evacuation, our flagship lost automated navigation after a cascade systems failure. Every tactical computer suggested different escape routes. Every officer trusted the displays." She paused before continuing. "One visiting human engineer ignored every recommendation and studied the ship itself. He noticed cooling pipes vibrating against the hull before our sensors detected the structural failure. Because he trusted observation instead of assumption, over 4,000 lives returned home." Hundreds of eyes slowly turned toward Caleb. He remained completely still, his expression unchanged. Lysra looked almost embarrassed. You never mentioned any of this. Caleb answered quietly. Nobody asked. A few cadets smiled gently, but no one laughed this time. Veilira folded her hands behind her back. This morning I did not invite Caleb Walker here because he is human. Her silver eyes swept across the academy. I invited him because he never confuses experience with reputation. She stepped closer to Caleb, her voice becoming softer though every word remained perfectly clear across the silent parade ground. Many years ago, I was one of the officers who doubted him. I believed rank always recognized wisdom. She allowed herself the smallest smile. He corrected that mistake without ever reminding me I had made it. Caleb looked toward the distant mountains beyond the academy walls where clouds drifted quietly between floating cliffs. People remember victories, he said. Machines remember maintenance. Both are important. Lysra slowly removed the polished academy navigation badge from her uniform and looked at it thoughtfully before placing it back in its proper place with greater care than before. Around her, other cadets unconsciously began observing the academy itself instead of simply standing within it. They noticed the changing wind, the distant hum of generators, the reflections moving across crystal towers, and the countless small details that had always been present but rarely seen. Without realizing it, they had already begun practicing the lesson the silent human had never tried to teach with words. The academy remained silent long after the archived recording disappeared. No orders followed. No ceremonial music filled the parade ground. Only the quiet sound of wind moving between the crystal towers drifted across the open courtyard as sunlight finally broke through the thinning clouds. Commander Veilira slowly turned toward Caleb. For a brief moment, she studied the weathered jacket, the repaired gloves, and the boots that had carried him through more years than most cadets had yet lived. Then, without hesitation or announcement, she stepped backward exactly one pace. Every instructor immediately noticed the movement. Every cadet watched without breathing. Veilira straightened her posture until every line of her uniform reflected perfect military precision. With calm deliberation, she raised her right hand in the highest formal salute recognized by the Aurelian Defense Command. The gesture was reserved for individuals whose judgment had preserved lives beyond the battlefield. Complete silence settled across the academy. Caleb looked genuinely surprised. "Commander," he said quietly, "that is not necessary." Veilira held the salute. "It is overdue." Her voice carried across the parade ground with effortless clarity. Rank deserves obedience. Character deserves respect. Slowly, almost instinctively, every senior instructor standing behind her repeated the same salute. One after another, hands rose across the platform until an entire line of decorated officers stood honoring the quiet human who had never once asked for recognition. The cadets stared in disbelief. Lysra felt her heartbeat quicken as she looked from the officers to Caleb. Only a few hours earlier she had laughed at his faded jacket and worn boots. Now the most respected commanders in the academy stood before him in complete military respect. She understood at last that experience did not always arrive wearing polished armor. Caleb hesitated before returning a simple human salute, modest and unhurried, without any trace of pride. When both gestures ended, no applause followed. Somehow applause would have made the moment smaller. Instead, Veilira addressed the formation one final time. "Remember this day." Her silver eyes moved across every young cadet. "You entered believing greatness announces itself. Today you learned that true professionals often arrive quietly, observe patiently, and leave others stronger than they found them." No one looked away. Even the newest cadets stood with expressions that carried more reflection than excitement. The lesson had become something far greater than an evaluation score. Several hours later, as the academy returned to its ordinary routine, Caleb walked alone toward the departure shuttle waiting beyond the eastern landing platform. Maintenance crews inspected the training maze while cadets resumed afternoon drills with noticeably slower, more deliberate movements. Many paused occasionally to observe the wind before following instructions. Others listened to machinery they had previously ignored. Small habits had already begun to change. Just before Caleb reached the shuttle ramp, footsteps approached behind him. He turned to find Lysra standing several feet away. She offered a respectful nod instead of an academy salute. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Not for helping us pass the exercise. for teaching us something no classroom ever could. Caleb smiled gently. You taught yourselves. She looked puzzled. How? He glanced back toward the academy where hundreds of cadets continued training beneath the bright afternoon sky. The moment you stopped trying to prove you were right and started trying to understand what was real. Lysera considered those words for a long moment before quietly nodding. Caleb stepped aboard the shuttle without another speech. As the transport lifted into the clear sky, Commander Valera watched from the highest balcony of the academy. She remained there until the small vessel disappeared beyond the floating mountains. Then she looked back at the parade ground where young cadets now observed every sound, every shadow, every movement with fresh attention. A lesson written on no academy wall had become the one they would remember longest. The universe often celebrates the loudest heroes, but history is quietly built by those who never needed to announce that they were one.